Hello everyone, welcome to Elite's Grid. Today we will be discussing questions based on assumptions. So first of all, what is the meaning of assumption? Assumption means anything that you suppose, you expect to be true, even without having a proof of it. For example, when you go to a doctor prescribes you certain medicines. So doctor assumes that you will follow all the instructions, you will take the medicine on time. That is why you have come to him. So doctor is making an assumption regarding your behavior. Similarly, government puts posters, for example, smoking is injurious to health. So the government is assuming that the citizens who will read that poster, they will understand it and they will ensure that all the instructions are followed. So they will not smoke. So government is making assumption in this case as well. So what exactly will happen in these questions? You will be given an argument and a conclusion. An argument would be like some justification, some evidence, some logic that will be given to you. And based on that, a conclusion will be drawn. And you will be asked to find the assumption which is underlying this argument and conclusion. The assumption which is the base of this argument and conclusion. The best way to understand assumption is to relate it with the foundation of your house. For example, we have foundation, and upon which the entire building stands. So if this foundation is weak or it doesn't exist, then the entire building will collapse. Similarly, assumption is the foundation upon which your argument and your conclusion depends. Your conclusion depends on this assumption. So if this will not exist, conclusion will collapse. So just like foundation, assumption is the foundation of conclusion. So whenever you're confused, always try to negate that option. When you're given many options, just negate that option and see what if this option is not true? What if this thing doesn't exist? Will the conclusion still be valid? If it will not be valid, then that will be the assumption because the conclusion is based upon that assumption. Now, another thing that you have to take care of is, just like when you're talking about your own house, you're talking about the foundation of your own house and not that of your neighbor's house. Similarly, in these questions, that assumption has to be linked to the argument and the conclusion that we are talking about. It should not be something absolutely unrelated. It should not be out of context. It should be related to the thing we are talking about. It should be related to the argument and to conclusion. And third thing, just like you can't see the foundation of your house. Similarly, in most of the cases, not all, but most of the cases, the assumption will not be explicit in the question. It will be hidden. So it won't be a direct statement taken from the passage. Most of the cases, okay, that will be the case. So it will not be explicit. Now let's start the question. 30 years ago, residents of Pandora County used to buy an average of 10 books every year. Today, the residents of Pandora County buy an average of 3 books every year. Therefore, it can be concluded that book sales in Pandora County must have fallen over these 30 years. Now, what is this passage saying? It is saying that over a period of 30 years, the average number of books, average. What is average? Average would mean, total number of books and divided by total number of residents. So that average used to be 10 before. Now it is 3. So this is the argument. And based on this, they are making a conclusion that since the average has fallen from 10 to 3, so the sales would have definitely decreased. So sales of books would have decreased over this period. So this is the conclusion. Now we have to find an assumption which is the base of this conclusion that sales will decrease. Now let's come to option A. The residents of Pandora County used to have more free time 30 years ago than they do now. Now, having more free time is not directly related to sale of books. Because let's say, we have Mr. A who has 5 hours of free time, and now B has 2 hours of free time. Now, it is not necessary that A will be reading more number of books and B will be reading lesser number of books. Maybe A will not be reading books, B will be reading more number of books. So you can't decide the number of books that they will be buying based on free time they have, because even if they have more free time, they can spend it on many other activities: eating, cooking, dancing, music, whatever. So it is not necessary that more free time has to get converted into more number of books only. It depends on individual to individual. So this cannot be our assumption upon which this conclusion can be based, because this is not directly linked to this. There is no link. There is no direct relationship between this and this. People with less time can also read. People with more time may not read. Not necessary. Option B. The residents of Pandora County have many more activities that vie for their attention today than 30 years back. Now, this option is saying that, maybe today people have more options than they used to have before. So now they may not be interested in reading. But that's not true that, having more options would mean that you will not read. For example, A has only 4 options: eat, cook, paint, read. And B may have 10 options like that. Still, B may be more interested in reading than A. Maybe A is more interesting. We can't say based on options only. If somebody has an interest, then they can go for reading, not necessarily the number of activities will define it. So even if somebody is having options or somebody is not having options, that's not directly linked to sales. It depends on the individual and not just on distractions. Just like, I told you in the beginning that when we're talking about your house, you have to talk about your foundation and not that of your neighbors. Similarly, we have to be direct with the argument. We're talking about the average. We're talking about the total number of books. Something has to be related to this. You should try to predict the assumption before only. That if the argument is related to, average number of books, and then at the end I'm saying the total number will be affected. So the assumption will be related to numbers only. Something related to this fact of average. And not activities or free time. This is something else. So this is not related to what we're talking about. Now let's come to option C. The population of Pandora County hasn't increased significantly in the last 30 years. Now this is saying that, the population hasn't increased significantly. Significantly is important here. Now see how. For example, okay, our conclusion is about total sales. Total sales means average multiplied by total number of residents. Okay, total number of people. Now earlier, the average was 10, and let us suppose the total number of people were 3. So the total number of books that were sold were 30. Now population has increased significantly. So if, for example, now average is 3 and population has increased significantly, for example, it has become 100 now. So now the total number of books sold are 300. So now my conclusion is not valid, because conclusion said that the book sales must have fallen. But in this case, book sales have not fallen, rather they have increased. But let us take another case where I'm increasing the population, but not significantly. Okay, earlier it was this, the average was 10 and the total number was 3. Now let's say the average has become 3 and population has increased marginally but it has become only 4. So now it is 12. Now again, the sales is lesser than before. So conclusion is valid. Now what I mean to say is, when you have to decide which is the option, which is the assumption, look for one thing, that if that assumption doesn't exist, then your conclusion will become invalid. For example, मतलब अगर ये जो statement है, population hasn't increased significantly, वो population, ये assume करना पड़ेगा कि population significantly means by large number increase नहीं हुई है, तभी हमारा conclusion valid है. अगर हम ऐसे assume ना करें, एक तो possibility है कि वो थोड़ी सी ही इंक्रीज हुई है विच इज नॉट सिग्निफिकेंट, तब भी कंक्लूजन वैलिड रहेगा. बट अगर हमें मतलब इन दिस केस कंक्लूजन विल बी वैलिड इवन इफ दिस स्टेटमेंट इज नॉट ट्रू. बट अगर हमें ये बताना है कि दिस इज द ऑप्शन विच इज द अजम्पशन, तो हमें ये चेक करना है कि अगर ये सही नहीं होता है, सो यू निगेट इट, रिवर्स इट, कि अगर ये सही नहीं होता है तो पूरा कंक्लूजन कोलैप्स हो जाएगा, कंक्लूजन विल बिकम इनवैलिड. तो अजम्पशन वो होगी जिसपे पूरा कंक्लूजन टिका हुआ है. उसके ना होने से कंक्लूजन हैज टू बिकम इनवैलिड, इररेलेवेंट, इट विल कोलैप्स. तो इसलिए जरूरी है कि ये जो स्टेटमेंट है दैट पॉपुलेशन हैज नॉट इंक्रीज सिग्निफिकेंटली, ये ही अजम्पशन होनी चाहिए, इसी तरह की अजम्पशन होनी चाहिए. अदरवाइज अ कंक्लूजन कैन नॉट स्टे. सो क्योंकि अगर हम इसको हटा रहे हैं तो कंक्लूजन भी नहीं रुक रहा है. इफ आई एम रिमूविंग दिस, conclusion is also not remaining valid. If I assume this to be true, then only my conclusion stays. So this is very near to assumption. Let's see the other options as well, but this is quite appropriate. Let's see if we get a better option than this. D, the literacy rate hasn't significantly changed in Pandora County over the past 30 years. Now, literacy rate again is not leading directly to change in sales. For example, today, even if we are more literate than other previous generations, that doesn't mean we have started reading more books. Maybe those people start doing other activities, and even if they're reading, they are reading on net, not necessarily on through books only. So literacy rate, even if it's less or it's more, may not convert into more sales or less sales. It depends on the interest of the individual. Even more literate people may not go for reading. They may have interest in some other activity. So this cannot be the assumption upon which our conclusion has to depend upon, because literacy rate is not a reliable factor. It depends on the individual. If somebody is literate, then also they may not go for buying more books, and hence no impact on the sale of the book. Option E, those residents of Pandora County who used to read 30 years ago have not become too old to read. Now, some residents, earlier, they are very old, and then our average was more. If those people are not able to read now, then also our total sales figure should not be too much affected by it. Why? Because if our population is this, then these very old people are a fraction of it. It's a subset of it. There are other people also, so many other people, and in 30 years, so many new births would have taken place. There are so many other people. Only this fraction cannot have an impact on sales of book. Even if they have an impact, this is such a large section of people. They will have more impact. So you can't rely only on these people to come to a conclusion. So this cannot be something upon which our conclusion can be based upon. So this cannot be that critical criteria, because this is only a fraction of the entire population. It doesn't represent the entire population. So any factors regarding them will not be suitable to have a conclusion for the entire population, because rest of the section is also there and their activity will also affect the sales. So this option is also not that critical. Only option C is the most important one, because if I do not assume this fact to be true, then my conclusion will become invalid. If I do not assume that population would have not increased, then I can never come to this conclusion that book sales would have decreased because of decrease in average. Otherwise, this conclusion will become invalid. If this is not assumed, conclusion would collapse. So this is our answer. So that's all for today. Thanks a lot for watching.